So much to talk about, but before we get going, I just want to open with a disclosure, which is that News Corp, the parent company of the Wall Street Journal, has a content deal with OpenAI. So let's kick it off, and let's start with money.
Sounds good. My favorite topic.
That's your favorite topic. So just this week, we had a $38 billion deal with AWS. It feels like every week there's a new OpenAI deal that we're writing about in the tens, hundreds, 300 billion. The numbers are bananas. How are you going to pay for it all?
Let me pull back a second. Sure. So it has been an incredible Q3. I'm just starting to get prepped for our investor call next week. First and foremost, we were talking about it out there. I'm sure you'll go deeper, but we are fully recapitalized. So as you ask the question, how we're going to pay for it all, one of the things that has been complicated is how we raise money as a company. And so getting ourselves into recap, we are now OpenAI PBC, that's our for-profit. We have, of course, created OpenAI Foundation, so the nonprofit, one of the largest, if not the largest, nonprofits ever birthed into the world, all done last week. So that is kind of day one. We're ready now for scale. I think the second thing is we are growing an incredibly healthy business with consumers and enterprises. Again, we'll go deeper, but 800 million weekly active users, the fastest growing consumer app ever. And then on the enterprise side, going deeper and deeper, we're seeing enterprises now go from pilot deeply into production. And then I think the third thing that really stands out for me is the ecosystem is rising to meet us. We cannot do this by ourselves. We are in the age of intelligence. As AI comes to the forefront, it's going to take the whole supply chain from chips and data center builders, all of the kit that goes into a data center. And then on the other side, it's going to take governments, it's going to take nonprofits, it's going to take educational establishments, all of it to come together to really show what this can do for humanity. And of course, it's a balance because there's many of us who are techno-optimists, who are very excited about what it brings in terms of good, but we also need to balance that with a strong point of view on safety and alignment.
And to that, so Sam has alluded to a very interesting new kind of financial instrument for finance and compute. Can you tell us more about what kind of financing he's alluding to and what that looks like where we are?
I think on the compute side, look, first of all, the amount of compute required here is massive. Mm-hmm. So I have been quoted as likening it much more to the dawn of kind of electricity coming into the world. And I think we're at this point where, imagine the moment where you put up, back in the day, electricity poles, you hung the wire, you attached it to a home, and you turned on the light. And we all had lights. Woohoo! I mean, that is an amazing thing. But imagine if we'd stopped there. It feels like where we're at today with AI. We've turned on the lights, but we've not yet thought about how we deploy it to heat a home, to clean a home, to have a TV, to curl your hair, like all the things we today do with electricity. So we're just getting started. We today, the thing I can tell you with absolute certainty, we are massively constrained on compute.
You're at 2.5 gigawatts?
We will end this year around 2 gigawatts. And for comparison, about 2 years ago, we ended the year at about 200 megawatts. So call it about a 10x in just 2 years. So imagine if we're on a curve that says we need to 10x again and get to 20 gigawatts in 2 years. 20 gigawatts, to put in context, I'm from Northern Ireland, so the island of Ireland uses about 6 to 7 gigawatts. So we're talking country-sized deployments, just to give you a sense of what we're trying to do. So the innovation on the finance side to pay for it is massive. It, of course, starts with what I said. We've raised equity as a private company, very kind of typical path, but we've raised a lot. Mm-hmm. We're building a really healthy business, so free cash flow, CFO's favorite way to fund anything. That is absolutely climbing quickly. But I think the third area we've gotten into is really working with our ecosystem to do some really interesting financing deals. I'm particularly proud of the AMD warrant structure that we put in place just a few weeks back, because it's very strong alignment of incentives. What we've seen is when someone comes out and says, we're going to work with OpenAI, they immediately are often seeing kind of impact on their stock price. And so to the extent that that's going to happen, we would like to have some alignment on that. And I think Lisa and team did something incredibly creative with that warrant structure.
Are there more sort of approaches like that that you're thinking of? What form might that take? Any hints?
I mean, I think something along the same lines, where can we create alignment on both sides that when your company does well and our company does well, we get paid together for that outcome. I think that is absolutely an area we continue to go deeper on.
Are there other types of companies that could help? Is it banks? Is it private equity? Is it deeper relationships with the chip companies? Like, what's the sort of green space in that at this point?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the world of financing today, the world of financing, let's just talk about a data center build. So a 1 gigawatt data center build today is about a $50 billion investment. That's for 1 gig. How that really breaks down is about $15 billion is for the land power shell, and about $35 billion is for the chips. And that's real frontier NVIDIA chips that we're talking about. The former is well known from a financing perspective. People know how to finance data centers. They typically have 20, 25, even 30-year lives. Those are easy things, I would say, today to finance. Chips have not been as easy to finance because, number one, I think we're all still getting our arms around what is the life of a frontier chip, right? We, OpenAI, at our core, are the model company that needs always to be the state of the art. That's what we've done time and time again. GPT-5 is no exception. But even in areas like open source, we're attempting to put the state-of-the-art model always out into the world. And in order to do that, we always want to be on the frontier chip. So the question is, how long does a chip remain on the frontier? Is it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or even longer? Now, in a world where we have no compute, or we're compute constrained, we are absolutely using chips that are like A100 equivalents that have been around like maybe 6, 7 years at this point in time. If that's the case, financing chips gets a lot easier. If the timeline on the chip stays short, that gets harder. And so this is where we're looking for an ecosystem of banks, private equity, maybe even governmental, the ways governments can come to bear.
Meaning like a federal subsidy or something?
Meaning like just first of all, the backstop, the guarantee that allows the financing to happen. That can really drop the cost of the financing, but also increase the loan to value, so the amount of debt that you can take on top of an equity portion for
so some federal backstop for chip investment.
Exactly. And I think we're seeing that. I think the US government in particular has been incredibly forward-leaning, has really understood that AI is almost a national strategic asset, and that we really need to be thoughtful when we think about competition with, for example, China. Are we doing all the right things to grow our AI ecosystem as fast as possible?
Are you talking to the White House about how to further formalize that kind of backstop?
We're always being brought in by the White House to give our point of view as an expert on what's happening in the sector, for sure.
Should we, is there something in the works that's tangible?
Nothing,
sort of...
No, I love you, Sarah, but nothing to announce, nothing that's going on right now.
If you wanted to, we're here to listen. So Sam has huge ideas, huge ambitions. You're in charge of the purse. Do you ever get a message from him and think, oh my God, what are we doing? How are we going to pay for this? How do you wrangle a dreamer, keep him in check?
That never happens. What are you talking about? I think, first of all, Sam's ambition and push is incredibly necessary. To go back to why we sit today with a real compute constraint. And what does that actually mean? I just want to be clear what it means when I say we're compute constrained. It means that, for example, we cannot roll out our new models when they are ready. So when Sora 2 was ready to when Sora 2 actually launched, there was probably a good 6, 7 months actually gap there. And you all know, like you sit in tech, right? You don't want to hold products or features on the runway if they're ready to go. Second thing is we are not able to, for example, take new features like Pulse. So we have a new feature that today is only available in our Pro SKU, so in our $200 per month SKU. What Pulse is, it's amazing. It is a daily quick update on what your day looks like, what the AI knowing you, using memory, so it really starts to utilize or productize memory, what it believes would be the most important things for you to be on top of. Like my pulse in the morning is usually some mixture of what's going on in AI data centers, what's going on in the financing world, but then it'll come to the fact that my husband's birthday is in 2 weeks, and here's some birthday presents. So it has a really nice mix. It's connected back into my calendar, connects back into my Slack. It knows all the other searches I've done. So its ability to really kind of form a point of view on me is awesome, frankly. The other thing we're doing with that product is moving from a reactive, right? You go to ChatGPT to get something done and it starts responding, to proactive. So now the agent is working for you overnight in order to create the next kind of level of intelligence for you. Why is it only in our $200 per month SKU?
That's a lot of searches.
Not because the CFO is like, let's figure out how to monetize it to its max. It's because literally what you said, we don't have enough compute to do the searches down into the plus SKU and then ultimately into the free SKU. And so back to your question on Sam, Sam was not with that ambition 2 years ago. He was pressing so hard on people to build, but he couldn't quite break through. And I think he feels the same way today. He's trying to break through to say, you all cannot even imagine what this demand for intelligence is going to look like, right? Remember, the lights have just turned on in your house, but you're all like happy with yourselves at a point in time when you should be thinking, the lights are not on in every home yet, nor are all the other things we could do. So yes, I do get a lot of prompts and pushes from Sam. They definitely sometimes can make me feel like, oh, okay, I have a lot to do now. But they more inspire me than create anxiety, because I'm here at this table because I genuinely think we're doing something that's never been done in the world before.
How do you take us inside some of those compute conversations? Because I think of what you described with Pulse, which has probably pretty immense monetization opportunities within if it's hyper-personalized. And then I think about Sora 2, which absolutely went viral. I've watched friends, my significant others, plow hours into making videos, but there's not an economic return on that. How do you decide that? And that is very compute-heavy work. How do you decide that's worth doing versus a broader rollout of something we could charge for?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, with something like Sora, keep in mind, what is Sora doing? It is absolutely kind of, we've rolled it out in a more social way, but in order to create a model that can understand natural language into video, it's really understanding the laws of physics. So when you pick the dog jumping off the boat deck into the water and spraying everyone on the deck, right, as your natural language prompt, the model actually has to understand how a projectile hitting a surface that is liquid, in this case lake water, is going to create certain ripples, how the spray will happen, and even things like how the fur will change as it hits and becomes damp. Right? That is an incredible amount for a model to start to understand about world simulation. In fact, the team internally that works on Sora is called World Simulation. And we think that this is a next frontier of, as we think about overall AI and intelligence being brought into the world, that it will be multimodal in nature. So while Sora might feel a little bit more frivolous, potentially, there's actually a lot going on in the training of that model that we think is absolutely core to the future of AI overall. But from a business perspective, we are absolutely building more and more business models out. Back to your original question about how do we make sure we can continue to pay for the scope of our ambition. So we began with a very simple business model, which was a subscription. And in some ways, it was done because no one expected ChatGPT to take off at the pace it did, right? In just 2 and a bit years, to get to 800 million weekly active users is incredible. And when you look at the graphs of time spent in the app, that's actually also just at an incredible, almost exponential type pace. So pure subscription model. But then our enterprise business has also started to grow. Our enterprise business is a mix of API plus the subscription, ChatGPT wall-to-wall, plus we're now moving into much more, I would say, paying for value. So things like credits and so on. And even in our mega deals, really trying to get closer to paying for ultimate value. And so you see us going much broader already.
Value?
Well, for example, in a lot of our larger deals or our transformational research deals, we're going deep with customers specifically into their domain. And think about areas like tech, material science, healthcare, where a breakthrough on something like a new drug, right, has an incredible amount of value associated with it. And so we're looking at business models that allow us to kind of collectively share in the value creation, not just on a per token type pricing or a per
Is that like a rev share
pricing
type format?
We may get to something like that. We have nothing that we have fully put into place, but think of it as our ability to even just charge to do the research is significantly higher than just a pure subscription or API type pricing.
I see.
On the Sora front, of course, that starts to unlock a way to think about other business models. Today we have commerce. So commerce is bottom of the funnel. I know you're dying to ask me about ads, so I'll just go there. It does begin to unlock a way to think about, is there a different model that isn't perhaps just the ads we think of today, but in a Sora example where you are being creative and you're creating a lot of visuals, the way Instagram has inserted ads into Instagram, I think feels very content rich.
Right, and Sam said he doesn't love ads for the sake of ads. So
exactly.
Can you, in as specific as you can, sort of, what will it look and feel like to users, and how far along are you in getting there?
Well, I think from a commerce perspective, what we've tried to do is get to the point of value. So if you think about what commerce does, is what we saw, what was the user behavior? First of all, we saw people using deep research to go very, very deep on commercial or decisions around things like, I want to buy a car, I want to buy a baby stroller, I want to buy a new coffee pot. So they were using deep research to get to the best possible outcome, but then they couldn't consummate it in the app. So we knew that they wanted that. So with commerce, it kept the true north, which is always make sure the user gets the best possible answer. Not the sponsored answer, but the best possible answer. But in that moment, how do we now make it easier for the user to do the next thing they want to do, which is buy the coffee pot? And in that moment, can we take some of the economics that the seller just made in both discovery and then ultimately the transaction? And we've shown that we can, working with partners like Walmart, Shopify, Etsy. Great starting points because they have really large catalogs. And also in many cases, like at Shopify's, they know how to work on the other side with the seller around things like delivery and returns and chargebacks and so on. So,
but isn't it tempting, if you have those partnerships and it's easier to, sort of instantly buy and spend money, doesn't it become compelling to prioritize those results?
No. And I think that is the North Star that we have to keep internally, because it's very important to our researchers and to our company that, first of all, it's AGI for the benefit of humanity. It's not AGI for the benefit of humanity that are sponsored. And I think this is where other platforms have maybe lost their way somewhat. We want to keep that pristineness. And we can, because it goes back to, we started with a subscription model, which if you were starting an internet company today and you said, I'm going to charge a subscription, people would say, you're crazy. That is just not how the internet works, Sarah. Do not even try that. And instead, what we've proven is we have a subscription model that will get us, we've gone from $1 billion in revenue 2 years ago, $4 billion last year to $13 billion this year. We're not quite done. But with that sort of growth, just around subscription, it allows you to be a lot more pointed where you inject the rest of your business model without compromising that true north, which is we must make sure always that the intelligence gets you to the best answer, not the paid for answer.
So on revenue, you mentioned about 14 billion this year. What do you envision the mix of consumer versus enterprise being in the next year and sort of longer term?
Sure. So on the enterprise side, our consumer business has been incredible, but our enterprise business is now really starting to take off. And so this year, we entered this year, consumer business was about 70% of revenue, enterprise about 30%. We're actually starting to tip right now to 60-40. And that will give you a sense of how fast the enterprise business has grown. So just year over year, we've seen enterprise business grow about 9x year over year. We just made an announcement this morning that we just hit 1 million enterprise customers on the platform. And so there has been incredible growth. Where is that happening? What is happening? I think number one, we're seeing enterprises move very definitively now from pilots to full production. In terms of sectors, our focus has been financial services, healthcare, and consumer, so kind of CPG, consumer packaged goods. And then I would say kind of a tier down, folks like life sciences, professional services, and manufacturing. Probably that would give you, but really it's all sectors of the economy. Originally, people were just doing wall-to-wall ChatGPT. Now they are taking the API and then some of the starting to get more sophisticated above to do things that are truly transforming their business. I'll give you a couple of examples. So Amgen is a customer. I was just with their CFO a few weeks ago. Amgen is using our product for faster FDA approvals. So the FDA process is full of process, full of a lot of documents, full of a lot of data, and you have to package it up in exactly the right way so the FDA can digest it and decide, can a drug be put forth to be safe for consumers to use. If you think about that process, if you can just speed that up by weeks, and what Amgen is seeing is even months of speeding it up, not only is it good for Amgen's business, but it can be the difference between a cancer patient living long enough to get access to the drug that could save their life and perhaps not being able to get access. So it has a beautiful kind of mission alignment. If you look at another customer like Walmart, Walmart is a good example of a customer now working with us on the commerce side, but also using a lot of our technology internally around things like how to merchandise, how to handle risk and so on their site, and going very, very deep, very, very fast. So we are seeing very real enterprise adoption.
And is that replacing jobs? Is it accelerating jobs? Like I feel, there's headlines sort of every week of white-collar jobs going away and sort of mass layoffs, often under the banner of AI. Is AI actually replacing workers from what you can see at these companies?
So my experience so far is I view it almost as more augmenting the workforce they have in place. Now, there are areas like customer success and so on, where I think there's a lot that a chatbot and so on can do without the need for kind of humans in the loop. But there are a lot of other places where I actually see it more accelerating kind of human workloads. If you look at, there was a Wharton study that just came out a few weeks back. What was interesting in that study is I think there's been a lot of fear about particularly the on-ramp, like the junior people coming out of college and hitting the workforce for the first time. That's actually the first survey I've seen that didn't say those jobs are disappearing. It just said those jobs are mortifying. Mm-hmm. If I look like inside of my finance, I'll talk my own shop, inside my own finance team, what I see is that we're able to get rid of a lot of the more mundane, backward-looking analysis type jobs, and we're moving people much more quickly into an insight job. And so I see it in things like, I'll give you an example, if there's CFOs in the room, every CFO has to deal with something called the flux. It's not a disease, it's something we do every period. It might be every month, might be every quarter, might be every year. And the flux is you get your actuals in, and then you look at what you expected. So there's usually a plan, and you compare across the two, across hundreds of line items. And someone's job, usually junior accountant's job, is to look at each one and look for where there's a bigger deviation than expected. And then they go off and they go call people and say, why is performance marketing up 300%? Like, has it been miscoded? Should it not be performance marketing? Or is it a mistake? Did someone put a 0 on the end? Or is it real? And if it's real, what's happening? And unfortunately, they spend a lot of their time in the first two categories, which that could just be done by today, our technology, and very little of their time in the insight kind of part of their job. And so what I'm seeing on my team is we now have an agent that does that whole flux for us. It literally trawls through and says, here's all the things that look a little out of the norm. Then because of connectors, it goes back into Slack and into our Google Docs and so on, and it will say, oh, looks like there was a meeting about performance marketing where we decided to go bigger in this country, and that's why it's up 300% in the period, so this looks reasonable. And then we can go have a conversation to say, okay, marketing team, was that performance marketing successful? Should we do more? And if so, should we budget more for it? And would we take it away from somewhere else? Or should we just lean in because the ROI is good? And suddenly you're having really good conversations with the business about how the business can go faster instead of being kind of the historians of the company, which no finance person wants to sit in history.
To go back to finances a little bit, there was a recent Microsoft filing that it looked, if you sort of extrapolate from what they disclosed, that OpenAI lost about $11.5 billion in the September quarter. Is that correct? And should the market expect that to be sort of a barometer of losses on the go forward?
Yeah, that is a lot of gap accounting that I probably don't want to go through on this stage, but it is a way over estimation of what really our business is doing.
Can you talk a little bit about where you are in the rate of cash burn now and the trajectory of that, particularly now that you've done the conversion, you're getting the company potentially ready for an IPO? How should we think about that?
Okay, so we're not getting ready. I'm not going to
We're not getting ready for an IPO?
IPO is not on the cards right now. We are continuing to get the company into a state of like constantly stepping up to the scale that we're at. So I don't want to get wrapped around an IPO axle. In terms of though the question about like how do I think about investing today versus starting to reap the investments, we are still in such hyper growth mode that it doesn't make sense for me to over-index on the outcome at the bottom of the P&L. While I can continue to fundraise and why I can continue to see my business grow at, for example, 9x year over year. Now, what I do need to make sure is that the underlying business is healthy. So, for example, I do spend time focused on the gross margins of both our consumer business and our enterprise business. And I will tell you, they're very healthy gross margins, very akin to good software companies. If that is the case, that means we have a healthy underlying business, and therefore investing in both compute ahead of what models could do next year and the year after, investing in on the application side, so how do we productize those models for the benefit of consumers, small businesses, all the way up to the largest enterprises and governments in the world, continues to make a lot of sense. So I'm not overly focused on a break-even moment today, because I know that if I had to get to a break-even, I have a healthy enough margin structure that I could do that by pulling back on investment in the period. And so it is a choice that I make today, and we make collectively as an executive team, because we think the right answer is continue to push really hard at growth, also because it's mission aligned, right? We are a public benefit corp, and we truly believe that this is building an ecosystem and an era of AI that is for the benefit of the world, and we don't want to go slow about it.
And it does feel, though, that in this moment there's a lot of exuberance around AI and AI spending, and you've described the vast compute needs that you have. This morning there's been a little bit of a market wobble led by some of the AI names. Do you worry that some of the exuberance will fade out? You know, Sam's alluded to a potential bubble. How do you think about the market's tolerance for the intense spending and the burn in the near term?
So, I mean, number one, I don't know if there's enough exuberance about AI when I look at the actual practical implications and what it can do for individuals. For that, we talked about it earlier, that mom with a diabetic kid who's at her wit's end about what to make for dinner tonight, right? Chat just changes the whole paradigm because of just the ideas that you get, the ability to photograph your fridge and immediately have a menu plan, all the way up to my example of Amgen, where a cancer patient can get maybe drugs that are now were never thought of before, but a model was able to kind of come up with a new molecular compound and a distribution mechanism that gets it to the cancer and gets you through FDA approval multiples times faster than we could even imagine. So the exuberance, I think, is real, and we should keep running at it. From a market perspective, look, I always go back, like my favorite market quote is always Philip Graham quote that says, you know, in the short run, the market can be a popularity machine. In the long run, it's a weighing machine. And so as a CFO, I always feel my job is to make sure that when we are weighed, we are appropriately substantive to show that this is a real technology making a real difference in the world with a real business model that will throw off real free cash flow. And I think our investors see that, and that's why you see the outcomes that we're having in terms of bringing more and more investors to the table.
I want to talk a little bit about something we were chatting about backstage, which is this idea of circularity. Bear with me, it's a longer question, and I know you have thoughts. So take CoreWeave, which rents out data center capacity. We're going to hear from the CEO later today. You're a CoreWeave shareholder and customer. CoreWeave's biggest customer is Microsoft, which is an investor in OpenAI and a key partner with whom you have a revenue sharing agreement. There's been, sort of questions about, do these sort of deals have a circularity to them that is reminiscent of past busts? What say you?
So I kind of reject the premise completely. We're all just building out a full infrastructure today that allows more compute to come into the world, which allows it to be digested by our models, so our models get better and better, allows us to productize those models so we can sell to consumers and to enterprises for all the benefits that I've already talked about. I don't view it as circular at all. Right? CoreWeave is building incredible compute. Thank you, Mike, if you're in the audience, along with many of our partners. In fact, a huge body of work in the last year has been to diversify that supply chain. But if you go back to a year ago today, we pretty much bought our compute solely from Microsoft, who've been a great partner, who saw it early, so full kudos to that team. But we needed to get into a position where we could have access to more compute, to be able to look at different design specs, to work with different vendors, so we understand ultimately the best outcome, to get more efficient and so on, and then ultimately to get a good price point, because you do need some competition in a market to get it priced appropriately. And so that's how I see our supply chain rising to meet this moment. And I just reject the premise. I don't think it's any different from any other business in the world.
Okay. I want to pivot a little bit to the consumer side, in hardware in particular. So OpenAI is working on a new device with Jony Ive. I think you've played with it. I think you've seen it. Can you give us any hints as to what it looks like, what it feels like? Maybe take us through a day of your use of it?
Definitely not. And this is where I have to be really careful since I'm a hand talker, and so I will find myself suddenly making hand gestures about the device.
She's sitting on them.
That I don't want to do. Look, what we have seen historically, this is not the shape of it or anything, is that every era of compute has brought with it the need for a new substrate for it to be fully kind of realized in the world. Right, at the beginning of the internet age, you had PCs. As you got into mobile, right, that brought with us the mobile phone. I think the mobile phone has taught us a lot of looking down, and I call it talking with your thumbs. I have teenagers, so this is particularly near and dear to my heart, of trying to explain that we talk with our mouths and we stare at people. We don't look down and text them. And so I do think that in a multimodal world for AI, what is beautiful about these models is they are as good through text as they are through being able to talk language, to be able to listen auditorily, to be able to visually see. And I'm always even surprised in my own use how little I use the other things, because I've been so schooled to kind of use text-based and somewhat visual-based frankly, because of the phone screen. And I'm looking forward to being able to bring something into the world that I think starts to shift that.
Do we say goodbye to our phones when we use this mystery device?
I cannot say. Jony Ive will come and literally steal my children if I tell you any of that. Actually, I might give them to him. But I do think that it will enable much more, it'll open the door to technology that has been shut to many, many people. And I say this like very personally, like I have parents who are older. I have one who's very visually impaired. And so the phone has actually been an incredible isolating moment for her, because she can't read text. We all have a family text message stream, and my dad has to read it out to her. And if he's not around, she hears the ping, but she doesn't know what the phone says. And so for her, teaching her that if she just hits the big button on the side of ChatGPT, it will talk to her, is just so game-changing. And I'm really looking forward to being able to see a lot more of that multimodality come through this next substrate. And I don't know if we've got the perfect first substrate, but I think we're going to try to be provocative on where this world will go.
It feels like a lot of, we'll get to audience questions in just a minute, but it feels like a lot of the world that you're envisioning for consumers is really intense personalization, the role of memory, being sort of hyper-served. We've seen some of the harm that can come from that as well, and whether it be the nature of sycophancy or just the depth of conversations that you can have when memory is involved. How do you balance that? We've seen some really sort of tragic events, people taking their own lives. How do you measure the risk of harm that your products might pose and manage that?
Yeah, so we take it very seriously. The security, alignment, all of those elements are, I think if you saw just the amount of conversations around the table internally, it's very, very front and center. And we've tried to be very transparent to the outside as well. So for example, when we saw the model that was starting to get very sycophantic, we pulled it back actually, and we wrote a very long blog post about what we saw, because we actually view our place in the world to also be to help educate and provoke and stimulate conversations more broadly. Like, all the best ideas are not going to come only from OpenAI on this front. You are right, we are going down a path, like when we think about what are the underlying kind of first principles of where we're going with chat, number one is definitely memory, because we think this adds an incredible amount of utility to the consumer. And I'm sure you already all experience it today. And now that we have apps inside ChatGPT, imagine how memory even force multiplies there, right? If I'm working with Booking.com or Expedia, but chat has the memory of knowing where I've been on vacation, or that I'm a family of 4, we like to stay in houses, not hotels, like all of that just cuts to the chase so much more quickly. So I have a better experience, but the conversion rate for those apps probably goes way up. Second thing that we're really trying to focus on is the super app. If Fiji were on stage, this is what she gets super passionate about. So I always think about, like, when Uber went public, they went public with this tagline about everyone's private driver. So it was like this sense of like something only really affluent people had experienced, which was kind of the black car that showed up for you, was now available to everyone. And so when I think about that same thing for ChatGPT, I think about a world of like everyone can now have a concierge doctor, everyone can have a personal tutor, everyone can have a stylist, you can have a travel agent, you can have all of these things. Now we need to get better, I think, at manifesting it. So study and learn mode, to me, is the first example of when we turn ChatGPT into a tutor for you. We're actually doing something much more than just telling it to be smart in this discipline. We are actually changing how it interacts. So if you ask ChatGPT straight, tell me about plants, and then you turn on study and learn mode and say, tell me about plants, the first thing it will probably do is ask you a question back. So kind of a classic teacher move, right? Socratic methodology. Tell me what you know about plants. And then it might tell you a little bit and say, okay, does that make sense, or where else do you want to go with this conversation? And then as you go further, it will actually test to see if you're learning. Now, it's literally the worst it will ever be, because it's still pretty simple. But even just that whole flip, to me, is just the beginning of how we will start to experience intelligence in this sort of super agent form. With all of that, we need to be very careful about alignment, making sure we're not kind of addicting people into the app, and instead making sure that you can, in fact, you all did a great piece on Monday, I think, and I thought you ended on the back page of the insert really well, showing that you can personalize things to, for example, remind chat that you want X amount of your answers to be closed-ended. That you want chat to remind you that personal relationships are really important. And so you can do a lot, even just with your own personalizing of the app, to remind yourself that we're all human in the end, and human interaction is also very healthy for us all. But I thought it was a very well done insert.
Well, thanks. But we do, as you build this, we essentially have to say, like, help yourself to my calendar, my Slack, my full light. That's a lot for people to hand over to you guys.
It is, although remember, when they're doing it within a personal context, but particularly in an enterprise context, that's all done with full enterprise security. So it's all done with SSO. I can only get access to the things that I'm allowed access to. Right? As a CFO, I can see most things in the org, but maybe some things are still like not open to me. So it sits within your full enterprise context. We are not training on that data. That data is not leaving your enterprise. So the security is very, very tight, because corporates are not going to deploy this if they don't believe you've hit that bar. The fact we work with folks like the US Army should give you a lot of confidence that we've had to run the traps a lot on the security side to make sure that when you do share a lot of that data, it is very much within your context and your corporate context in particular.
Understood. Well, I've gotten to ask a lot of my questions. I would love to open it to the audience. We have time for a few. Folks with mics, maybe just over there, miss.
Good morning, Pam Dillon. I married an Irishman.
Well done.
You're all poets. What is it? Your description of the business is beautiful. As I listen to it and I compare it to the other frontier models, I am impressed by the fact that there's so much similarity. Can you identify the difference, the character difference of what you are building versus any of the other frontier models? So if you were going to describe your business as a person with personal characteristics, maybe, how would they be different? How would you be different from everyone else?
That is such
Do you want to come up here and do this? That was very good.
That is a super cool question. I think probably the first word that would spring to mind is expert. So we want to be right on the leading edge. We want to be the expert. When I think about what goes into intelligence to be right at that expert level, it is, number one, access to compute, number two, access to data, and number three, access to incredible researchers that are building the best algorithms. On the compute side, right, we've talked at length about why we need to keep funding it and pushing the envelope to go as big as possible. We do not believe we have reached any kind of natural like flattening of the line in terms of compute. So the logarithmic scale for pre-training is still very much intact. That was like a whole swirl at the beginning of the year. Post-training, where I think OpenAI has actually had probably the biggest breakthroughs that got us to reasoning, still a lot of exponential growth that we see there right now, just knowing what we know before we've had more breakthroughs. And then we're learning a lot about what we call test time compute, which is training right at the point where usage is happening. So compute on the up and to the right to stay expert. On the data side, it's both how do we continue to get data in an appropriate way by doing, for example, the deals we've done with News Corp, with others, Le Monde, for example, the FT. And then beyond that, synthetic data. So we're actually starting to see some very nice breakthroughs on the synthetic data side. And then third, on the researcher side, all we do is AI. And so if you want to be on the bleeding edge as a researcher in this space, and there's just not that many people in the world that can call themselves truly breakthrough researchers, OpenAI has to be the place you want to come do that. And we think today OpenAI is the place you want to come do that, because this is all we do. So I would kind of say for us, our frontier model will be different because we want to be the leading expert in the world.
Anyone else here on the edge?
Hi, Sarah. Ross Rosenberg from Magic Leap. One question I had relates to context and maybe builds on the last question. Today, unless you tell it, the chat model doesn't know sort of where I'm at the peak of my intellectual powers, and it's 2 a.m. and I'm drunk. How do you think about adding more context to the prompts?
So first of all, I think the model actually is, it's natively intelligent. I will not use you 2 a.m. with maybe a few whiskeys in you. We're staying in a very Irish zone right now. And I can say that as an Irish person without totally offending a whole nation, hopefully. But I think if I take a different example, the model can tell very quickly how good you are in a given topic without you having to tell it. This is why I like study and learn mode. Because almost from the minute it asks me, what do you know about plants? If I respond in a way that seems probably more like a 18-year-old that's starting to write a paper for college, it will respond one way, versus if I'm literally the world expert working at whatever institution, it can see my level of knowledge just went up. Maybe a better way, like a kind of a goosebump moment for me, we had one of the probably the world expert at one of the national labs come in to talk about material science. And it was at a point where we just released the O series, so the reasoning models. So this is the big breakthrough we'd had on post-training. And he showed us how he started by giving it a prompt. He's working on nuclear fusion and the materials that would have to contain a reaction. My master's was in material science, so that's probably why I got goosebumps. And he gave it a prompt and said, answer this problem as if you are an undergraduate. Answer this problem as if you're a PhD. Answer this problem as if now you're a 10-year expert. Answer this problem as if you're my peer. And he kind of gave an example of his peer. And then he said, push the limit. And the answer he got back, he said, I'm not sure. This could be novel. This could literally be a breakthrough. But since it's a breakthrough, I actually don't know. So now I need to go off and test. But I think we're on that edge where we're actually starting to get to the point of innovation. And so it's a long way to say that if the model can go from an undergraduate response to literally the best in the world and breakthrough, I think it probably can figure out very fast if you've had 2 more whiskeys than you should have at 2 a.m. And so I kind of fall back to the intelligence of the model in some ways for that context.
Maybe one more question? Here. We'll keep it simple right next to him.
First of all, thank you. I mean, on behalf of the entire family, especially my mom in India, who's a big fan of ChatGPT. So,
Thank you.
This is on the North Star, the AGI for humanity, and two maybe questions there. One, how will AGI be verified? It's in the contract, I think, with Microsoft. And the second is, if you can talk about the foundation, and let's say on healthcare, how do you think it will potentially benefit humanity with the work that the foundation will do, and it's the largest foundation possibly in the world?
Yeah. On the AGI breakthrough point, we have used a definition internally and published it externally that we think we are at AGI when we reach that point where the models are capable of the vast majority, not the vast majority, the majority of economically valuable work. And our economics team has actually done some really good work. They've published it on what they call GDP eval, effectively saying if we look at all of the sectors in the economy, we look at the work each of those sectors do almost by job type, and can a model now be involved? Could it do that work, or can it be involved in kind of accelerating that work and then summing that all up? So it's as you would expect, quite data-driven, how we think about it. I think there's also going to be bringing along the populace, because there's a wonky definition of AGI and data that proves it. But I think we need to bring humanity alongside to say, does this feel like we've had a breakthrough? Is this really changing my life in some way, shape, or form? I think what's interesting, if you look back a year ago to now, and we look at a lot of data, I think people have come on that journey. And I think this is where great journalism, I think this is where governments, I think this is where education establishments have a massive role to play to allow for people to be optimistic, not Pollyanna-ish, but actually optimistic, and maybe not completely doomers, while still making sure we're maintaining safety and so on. Because I think to leave people behind because they live in a state of fear would be really letting down a population. And then I think on the breakthrough point, we are so excited that the foundation has the amount of just capital behind it now to really go make a difference. I think it's a really good yin-yang to a for-profit having a nonprofit alongside, because it can go invest in things that's a little harder for us to do when we're focused from a for-profit perspective. Like where the breakthroughs come, I mean, I don't know. In some ways, I don't see a single segment of kind of healthcare research that doesn't get accelerated, doesn't benefit. On the other side, I wish I was smart enough to be able to tell you today, here's exactly what could happen. One thing I did see, my daughter is a chemist at university, and she worked this summer in small molecule drug delivery to cancerous sites. And just the speed with which they could now model electronically, like examples of molecules that could perhaps now be tested in a lab concept, it went up orders of magnitude. So I think the speed at which we'll be able to do things like drug delivery to, say, brain cancer, like those are areas I get really excited about, just because I've seen a little bit of that traction, just early days from utilizing AI.